In the shadow of El Escorial, where the ghosts of Habsburg emperors whispered through marble corridors, a prince unprepared for power ascended a throne trembling beneath the weight of empire. Charles IV, plump, mild-mannered, more at home sketching birds or tinkering with locks than signing decrees, was crowned King of Spain in 1788. He inherited not just a crown, but a kingdom balanced on the edge of a volcano. Europe was stirring, revolutions brewed in salons and slums alike. And yet this king, often dismissed as a simpleton, a pawn, a relic, would preside over the most catastrophic collapse of Spanish global dominance in 2 centuries. But was he truly the fool history painted? Or was he a man tragically out of time, caught between Enlightenment dreams and the iron grip of absolutism? Born in 1748, Charles was never meant to rule. His older brother, Philip, was the heir, brilliant, charismatic, destined for glory. But when Philip succumbed to smallpox in 1761, the crown's burden shifted to the shoulders of a shy, unassuming boy more enamored with hunting and mechanics than statecraft. His father, Charles III, the so-called enlightened despot, had transformed Spain, modernizing the economy, curbing clerical power, building roads, and championing science. But he also instilled in his son a deep distrust of change, a reverence for divine right, and an almost pathological aversion to conflict. When Charles IV took the throne, he swore to uphold his father's legacy. Instead, he would dismantle it piece by piece, without ever realizing it. The early years of his reign shimmered with deceptive calm. Spain still claimed vast territories, from California to the Philippines, from Louisiana to Buenos Aires. Its silver mines fed European treasuries. Its navy, though weakened, remained formidable. In Madrid, the court glittered with powdered wigs and French silks. Yet beneath the surface, rot festered. The Inquisition still held sway. The nobility hoarded land while peasants starved. The treasury bled from endless wars. And into this fragile ecosystem stepped a man who would become the true power behind the throne, Manuel Godoy. Barely 25, handsome, ambitious, and rumored to be the Queen's lover, Godoy rose from royal guardsman to chief minister in under 5 years. Charles, trusting and disengaged, handed him the reins of empire. It was, in hindsight, the first fatal miscalculation. But the real storm came not from within, but from beyond the Pyrenees. In 1789, Paris erupted, the Bastille fell. The French Revolution sent shockwaves through every royal palace in Europe. Kings trembled, crowns felt heavy. Charles IV, deeply conservative and devout, recoiled in horror. Spain joined the anti-revolutionary coalition, sending troops to fight the godless Jacobins. The war was disastrous. Spanish forces were routed, the treasury emptied. And in 1793, the revolutionaries struck back, executing Louis XVI, Charles's cousin. Grief turned to paranoia. The court closed ranks. Enlightenment reforms were rolled back. Censorship tightened. The king, once passive, now clung to absolutism like a life raft in a hurricane. Yet even as Spain recoiled from revolution, it could not escape the tides of history. The world was changing and fast. Steam engines puffed in England. Constitutions were drafted in Philadelphia. In Saint-Domingue, enslaved people rose up and forged Haiti. Spain, meanwhile, drifted. Charles signed treaties without reading them. Godoy negotiated alliances in secret. The Queen, Maria Luisa, a sharp, pragmatic woman despised by the aristocracy, ruled through her husband's acquiescence. The monarchy became a theater of illusions. The king played the part of sovereign, but the script was written by others. And the audience, the Spanish people, were beginning to notice. By the late 1790s, Spain had been dragged into a geopolitical dance it could not win. First an ally of France, then its enemy, then, under Godoy's infamous Peace of Basel in 1795, its subservient friend again. The turnabout stunned Europe. Overnight, Spain shifted from fighting revolutionary France to embracing it. Why? Because Napoleon Bonaparte had risen, a new kind of ruler, neither king nor democrat, but conqueror. And Godoy, ever the opportunist, believed alliance with the Corsican upstart was Spain's only salvation. Charles, exhausted and indifferent, signed the treaty. He had no idea he had just signed his dynasty's death warrant. The consequences were swift. British ships blockaded Cádiz. Trade with the Americas stalled. Hunger spread. Riots flared in Seville and Barcelona. Whispers of tyranny and treason filled taverns. And in the royal palace, a prince simmered with fury. Ferdinand, the heir apparent, despised Godoy and his parents' weakness. He saw himself as Spain's savior, pious, decisive, destined to restore honor. Secretly, he began courting military officers, clergy, and foreign ambassadors. A plot was forming, not just against Godoy, but against the very king who had given him life. The stage was set for betrayal, and it would come not with a cannon's roar, but with a son's cold ambition. While Europe burned under Napoleon's march, Spain stood paralyzed, a giant chained by its own indecision. Charles IV, now in his 50s, had retreated further into private obsessions, clockmaking, ornithology, long walks in the palace gardens. Governance? That was Godoy's affair. And Godoy, elevated to Prince of the Peace and later Duke of Alcudia, ruled with a blend of charm and ruthlessness that alienated everyone except the king and queen. He amassed fortunes, built palaces, and took mistresses openly. The people called him the puppet master. The nobility called him the usurper, and Ferdinand, the crown prince, called him the enemy. Ferdinand was everything his father was not: intense, suspicious, burning with messianic zeal. He believed Spain's decline was divine punishment for moral decay, and that God had chosen him to cleanse the realm. From his rooms in the royal palace of Madrid, he plotted in silence. He wrote letters to Napoleon, offering loyalty in exchange for support against his parents. He forged alliances with conservative clerics who saw Godoy as an agent of Freemasonry and godless innovation. He even flirted with revolutionaries, promising constitutional reform if they backed his coup. Ferdinand's network grew, silent, patient, venomous, and the king, lost in his workshop, heard none of it. The breaking point came in 1805. Spain, bound to France by treaty, sent its navy to join Napoleon's invasion of England. Off Cape Trafalgar, the combined Franco-Spanish fleet met Admiral Nelson. The result was annihilation. 19 Spanish ships sunk or captured, thousands dead. The remnants of Spain's naval power, once the terror of the Atlantic, vanished in a single afternoon. Madrid reeled. Godoy, blamed for the disaster, clung to power by promising even deeper loyalty to Napoleon. Charles, shattered but compliant, signed orders to mobilize more troops, more gold, more lives for the French cause. The people's fury reached boiling point. In March 1808, the spark finally ignited. Rumors spread that Godoy planned to flee Madrid with the royal family to South America, abandoning Spain to French occupation. A mob, composed of soldiers, artisans, and students, stormed Godoy's palace. They ransacked his rooms, tore his portraits, and hunted him through the corridors. He hid for 2 days in an attic, trembling before being dragged out and arrested. The uprising, known as the Mutiny of Aranjuez, was not just against a minister, it was against an entire system. And Ferdinand, watching from the shadows, seized his moment. With the crowd baying for blood, Ferdinand confronted his father. In a chilling private meeting, he demanded Charles abdicate. "The people will not be ruled by a king who serves France," he declared. "They want a sovereign who serves Spain." Charles, exhausted, heartbroken, and terrified of civil war, yielded. On March 19, 1808, he signed the instrument of abdication. Ferdinand was proclaimed King Ferdinand VII. Church bells rang, crowds cheered. Spain, it seemed, had been saved. But Ferdinand's triumph lasted only weeks. Napoleon, watching from Paris, saw not liberation but opportunity. He summoned both Charles and Ferdinand to Bayonne, a town near the French border, under the guise of mediating the royal dispute. Once there, the trap snapped shut. French troops surrounded the palace. Napoleon, with icy politeness, demanded that both kings renounce their claims to the Spanish throne. Charles, ever passive, complied immediately. Ferdinand, after days of resistance, broke down and surrendered his crown. In one stroke, the Bourbon dynasty of Spain was dethroned, and Napoleon placed his own brother, Joseph Bonaparte, on the throne as King of Spain. The betrayal was absolute. The Spanish people, who had cheered Ferdinand's rise, now realized they'd been played, not just by Godoy or Napoleon, but by their own prince. From Madrid to Seville, from Galicia to Valencia, a cry rose that would echo through history: "Viva España!" Not for a king, not for a dynasty, but for the nation itself. The Peninsular War began, not as a royalist crusade, but as a popular uprising. Peasants with scythes attacked French columns, priests blessed guerrilla bands, women poisoned wells. This was not war as Europe knew it. This was total war, fueled by fury, faith, and the raw will to survive. Back in France, Charles IV watched it all from gilded exile. He played cards, he sketched birds, he wrote letters begging Napoleon for his throne back. He never understood that the Spain he loved, the hierarchical, obedient Catholic Spain, was gone. In its place stood a people awakened, and they would no longer accept kings who bowed to foreign masters. The age of passive monarchy was over. The age of the nation had begun. Exile suited Charles IV better than kingship ever had. In the chateaux of Compiègne and Marseille, far from the chaos of rebellion and war, he found peace. He rose at dawn, fed his pet birds, worked on his clocks, and took long walks with Maria Luisa, now gray-haired but still sharp-tongued. Godoy, once the most hated man in Spain, lived nearby under French guard, a ghost of his former self. The three of them, king, queen, and favorite, formed a strange, melancholic trio, reminiscing about hunts in the Sierra de Guadarrama and feasts at El Pardo. They spoke little of politics. What was there to say? Their world had vanished. Meanwhile, in Spain, hell reigned. The Peninsular War, known to the Spanish as the War of Independence, raged with brutal ferocity. French columns marched through burning villages. Spanish guerrillas ambushed them in mountain passes, leaving no survivors. Entire towns were razed in reprisal. Napoleon, who had dismissed Spain as a country of monks and donkeys, now poured over 300,000 troops into the peninsula. Yet for every soldier he sent, 10 more Spaniards rose in resistance. The war became a cancer in France's side, a Spanish ulcer, as Napoleon called it, that drained men, money, and morale. And at the heart of it all was an absence. No king, no legitimate ruler, only chaos. But legitimacy, it turned out, was not necessary. In the power vacuum, something astonishing emerged: the Cortes of Cádiz. As French troops occupied Madrid, Spain's political elite fled to the fortified port of Cádiz, the only major city still free. There, in 1810, deputies from across the empire gathered and did the unthinkable. They declared sovereignty resided not in the king, but in the nation. And in 1812, they promulgated a constitution, the Spanish Constitution of 1812, one of the most radical documents of its age. It established freedom of the press, universal male suffrage, with caveats, separation of powers, and limits on clerical authority. It was Enlightenment idealism forged in the fires of war, and it was written in direct defiance of everything Charles IV had ever believed. From his French villa, Charles heard rumors of this godless charter. He wrote furious letters to Napoleon, demanding it be crushed. He called the deputies traitors, Jacobins, enemies of God and king. Yet his protests meant nothing. He was a king without a kingdom, a voice without an echo. Even his son Ferdinand, imprisoned in France, disavowed him. The old order was crumbling, not just in Spain, but across Europe. Monarchs who once ruled by divine right now begged parliaments for permission to reign. The world had moved on, and Charles, tinkering with gears and waxing nostalgic for lost hunts, was left behind. Then, in 1814, everything changed again. Napoleon was defeated, exiled to Elba. The Bourbon dynasty was restored across Europe. In Spain, Ferdinand VII was released and returned as king. The people cheered again. They believed he would honor the Cádiz constitution, that he would lead Spain into a new era of liberty and strength. But Ferdinand had learned nothing from exile. Within weeks of his return, he abolished the constitution, arrested liberal leaders, and restored absolute monarchy. The Inquisition returned, censorship returned, fear returned. Charles IV, now in Rome under papal protection, watched his son's tyranny with grim satisfaction. At last, he thought, a true king sits on the Spanish throne. But the truth was more tragic. Ferdinand's repression sparked new rebellions. Liberal uprisings flared in 1820. Colonial wars erupted in the Americas. Spain, once a global empire, was fracturing at its core. And Charles, approaching 70, could only pray for his soul, for his dynasty, for a Spain he no longer recognized. He died in 1819 in a modest Roman villa, surrounded by clocks that no longer ticked in sync. His body was returned to Spain years later, buried not in the royal pantheon at El Escorial, but in a quiet corner of the monastery. History remembered him as weak, indecisive, a footnote between greater men. But perhaps that was the cruelest judgment of all. For Charles IV was not evil. He was simply obsolete. A man built for a world that no longer existed, ruling at the precise moment that world ended. What do we do with a king who never wanted to rule? A monarch whose greatest ambition was to be left alone? History often simplifies such figures, calling them fools, cowards, or puppets. But Charles IV's tragedy is not that he failed as a king. It's that he was never allowed to be anything else. Born into a system that demanded divine authority, yet offered no training in human reality, he did what many would do. He delegated, disengaged, and dreamed of quieter days. And in doing so, he became the catalyst for Spain's transformation, from an empire of kings to a nation of citizens. His reign marked the end of an era, the last gasp of absolutism, the final flicker of a world where God-anointed monarchs and peasants knew their place. But from the ashes of his failure rose something new, a Spanish identity forged not by royal decree, but by popular will. The guerrillas who fought Napoleon did not carry Charles's banner. They fought for La Patria, the homeland. The deputies in Cádiz did not quote his laws. They wrote new ones. Even Ferdinand's desperate attempts to turn back time could not erase what had been awakened, the idea that Spain belonged to its people, not its kings. Today, Charles IV is remembered mostly through paint. Francisco Goya's haunting portrait, The Family of Charles IV, hangs in Madrid's Prado Museum. The king stands stiffly, eyes dull, lips parted as if about to speak, but never quite managing it. Around him, his family glows in silk and lace, but their faces are sharp, calculating, hungry. Only Charles looks lost, out of place, like a guest who wandered into the wrong room. Goya, who served as court painter, captured the truth with brutal honesty. This was not a dynasty in its prime, but a family adrift in history's tide. Yet beyond the canvas, Charles's legacy lingers in ways few acknowledge. The collapse of his reign triggered the Spanish-American Wars of Independence. Simón Bolívar, José de San Martín, and others watched Spain's implosion and saw their chance. Within a decade, most of Spain's empire was free. The global balance of power shifted. The age of colonial empires began its slow, irreversible decline. All because a quiet man in Madrid chose not to read the treaties he signed. But perhaps the most enduring lesson of Charles IV is this: power unexamined is power surrendered. He trusted too much, to his ministers, to his wife, to the illusion of stability. He assumed the world would remain as it was, because it always had been. And in that assumption, he lost everything. His throne, his son's loyalty, his country's future. In an age of upheaval, neutrality is not safety, it is surrender. So why revisit this forgotten king? Because his story is not just about Spain. It is about every society that stands at the crossroads of change. About leaders who cling to the past while the future burns. About ordinary people who, when abandoned by their rulers, rise to claim their own destiny. Charles IV did not shape history, but his failure to act allowed others to reshape it in ways he could never imagine. And that brings us to you. If this story moved you, if it made you question, reflect, or even rage, then you're part of something bigger. History isn't just names and dates, it's a mirror. And in its glass, we see not only kings and revolutions, but ourselves. Who are we when the world demands courage? When the easy path leads to ruin? When silence becomes complicity? This documentary was made not just to recount the fall of a crown, but to awaken the citizen in you. Because the spirit that rose in Cádiz, that fought in the mountains of Castile, that dreamed of a freer world, that spirit lives on. In classrooms, in protests, in quiet acts of integrity, in you. If you believe stories like this matter, if you believe history should challenge, not comfort, then join us. Subscribe to our channel. We dive deep into forgotten turning points, unsung heroes, and the hidden forces that shape our world. New documentaries drop every week. Hit the bell so you never miss an episode. And together, let's keep the flame of critical history alive, not as spectators, but as participants in the story still being written. Because the next chapter, it's yours.